maybe the Russians wanted to spread that story. They might have amplified it, but it also happened to be factual. We know, based on the letter from the CEO of Meta, that the government pressured him during the COVID pandemic to censor certain views, and he expressed
Talking about
regret
the Hunter
about
Biden
agreeing to some of
laptop
that.
and how it
So
turned
there are
out to
people
be
in this
true.
country that had their accounts locked or even got, in some cases, canceled out because they questioned the efficacy of masks, something we now know Dr. Fauci agreed masks were not a solution to all the problems, that questioned the whether there was the lab leak, or put out the lab leak theory that at one time was considered a conspiracy and a flat out lie, and now our own intelligence agencies are saying it's 50% likely, just as likely as the natural occurring. So this is a tricky minefield, and it's even trickier now because Russia's still doing it more than anybody else, but the others, you don't need to have a big, expensive operation to pursue some of this. I think we should anticipate that in the years to come, and it's happening already, the Iranians are going to get into this. They already are. The Chinese are going to get into this business. They already are. And you see them using that in other countries to sow discord and division. It's coming. It's also North Korea, multiple, and maybe even friendly states who have a preference on how American public opinion turns. So I do think it's important to understand what our policies are today in terms of identifying what is disinformation, what is actually generated by a foreign adversary versus the amplification of a pre-existing belief in America, which has left a lot of people in a position of being labeled collaborators, and when in fact they just hold views that on that one issue happen to align with what some other country hopes we believe as well. And I'm very interested to learn what our internal policies are in our these companies, because I think it's a minefield that we may end up sowing in an effort to prevent discord. I don't want to sow discord, and that's one of the dangers that we're now flirting with. So thank you for being here. I look forward to hearing your testimony.
And before I go, I just want to reemphasize, I agree with Senator Rubio. Americans got the right to say whether the First Amendment right, to say that whether we agree, disagree, no matter how crazy. I do think there's a difference when foreign intelligence services cherry pick information and amplify it, that in many ways stokes division. And that's, again, where the core of this debate is, and we're anxious to hear your testimony. I'm not sure who drove the short straw to go first.
Happy to launch. Okay. Chair Warner, Vice Chair Rubio, members of the committee, thank you all for the opportunity to be with you today. Google, Alphabet is in the business of earning the trust of our users. We take seriously the importance of protecting free expression and access to a range of viewpoints, while also maintaining and enforcing responsible policy frameworks. A critical aspect of that responsibility is doing our part to protect the integrity of democratic processes around the world. That's why we've long invested in significant new capabilities, updated our policies, and introduced new tools to address threats to election integrity. We recognize the importance of enabling people who use our services in America and abroad to speak freely about the political issues that are most important to them. At the same time, we continue to take steps to prevent the misuse of our tools and our platforms, particularly attempts by foreign state actors to undermine democratic elections. To help advance this work, we created the Google Threat Intelligence Group, which combines our Threat Analysis Group, or TAG, and Mandiant Intelligence. Google Threat Intelligence identifies, monitors, and tackles threats, including coordinated influence operations and cyber espionage campaigns. We disrupt activity on a regular basis, and we publish our findings. And we provide expert analysis on threats originating from the kinds of countries we were talking about: Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, as well as from the criminal underground. This year alone, we've seen a variety of malicious activity, including cyber attacks, efforts to compromise personal email accounts of high-profile political actors, and influence operations both on and off our platforms that are seeking to sow discord among Americans, the way you were both discussing. We remain on the lookout for new tactics and techniques in both cybersecurity and disinformation campaigns. We are seeing some foreign state actors experimenting with generative AI to improve existing cyber attacks, like probing for vulnerabilities or creating spear phishing emails. Similarly, we see generative AI being used to more efficiently create fake websites, misleading news articles, and robotic social media posts. We have not yet seen AI bring about a sea change in these attacks, but we do remain alert to new attack vectors. To help us all stay ahead, we continue to invest in state-of-the-art capabilities to identify AI-generated content. We've launched SynthID, an industry-leading tool that watermarks and identifies AI-generated content in text, in audio, in images, and in video. We were also the first tech company to require election advertisers to prominently disclose ads that include realistic-looking content that is synthetic or digitally altered. On YouTube, when creators upload content, we now require them to indicate whether it contains altered or synthetic material that appears realistic, which we then label appropriately. And we will soon begin to use content credentials. That's a new form of tamper-evident metadata coming out of the C2PA program that we'll discuss, I'm sure, to identify the provenance of content across ads, search, and YouTube, and to help our users identify AI-generated material. We, our users, industry, law enforcement, and civil society all play important roles in safeguarding election integrity. We encourage our high-risk users, including elected officials and candidates, to protect their personal and official email accounts, and we offer them our strongest set of cyber protections, our Advanced Protection Program. We also work across the tech industry, including through the Tech Accord that you mentioned, Chair Warner, and the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, the C2PA group I mentioned, to identify emerging challenges and to counter abuse. We are committed to doing our part to keep the digital ecosystem safe, reliable, and open to free expression. We appreciate the committee convening this important hearing, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Well, thank you, Chairman Warner. Thank you, Vice Chairman Rubio. It's a pleasure to be here, and I first want to say many days we are competitors, but I think when it comes to protecting the American public, all three of us and all of us across the tech sector are and need to be colleagues committed to a common cause of protecting our elections. And I think we have to start by recognizing that there are real and serious threats, including in this election. We've all been reporting on them, we've been seeing them, and you've talked about them. Every day we know that there is a presidential race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. But this has also become an election of Iran versus Trump and Russia versus Harris. And it is an election where Russia, Iran, and China are united with a common interest in discrediting democracy in the eyes of our own voters and even more so in the eyes of the world. So what do we do? What is the role and responsibility of the tech sector? That's the fundamental question you have put to us. First, I think we should always adhere to two principles. The first is to preserve the fundamental right to free expression that is enshrined in our Constitution that Vice Chairman Rubio spoke about. That is and needs to be our North Star. And the second is to defend the American electorate from foreign nation states who are seeking to deceive the American public. How do we do this? I think we have three roles. The first is really to prevent foreign nation state adversaries from exploiting American products and platforms to deceive our public. We do that with guardrails, especially around AI-generated content, but we also do it by identifying and addressing content on our platform, especially AI-generated content created by foreign states. I think our second role is to protect candidates, the people who are putting themselves out there to run for office, their campaign staffs, the political parties, the county and state election officials on which we all rely. And we do that in part by providing them with technology and know-how. Google, Microsoft, we all do that. And we do it by getting out there and working with them. At Microsoft, we've now worked across 23 countries this year. We've had more than 150 training sessions reaching more than 4,700 people. And we do it by responding immediately in real time when incidents arise, as we do, to work with campaigns to help protect them. And the third role we play, quite possibly the most important, is to build on your leadership in having this hearing. to prepare the American public for the risks ahead. We do that by informing them, encouraging them to check what they see, to recheck it before they vote. And we do it by, I think, recognizing that there is a potential moment of peril ahead. Today, we are 48 days away from this election, as you said, Chairman Warner. The most perilous moment will come, I think, 48 hours before the election. That's the lesson to be learned from, say, the Slovakian election last fall and other races we have seen. I think above all else, even in a country that has so many divisions, I do hope we can all remember one thing. If Google and Microsoft and Meta can get together, if Republicans and Democrats and independents can work together, then I think we have an opportunity as a country to stand together, to ensure that we, the people of the United States, will choose the people who lead us, and we will protect ourselves from foreign interference and deception. Thank you very much.
Chairman Warner, Vice Chairman Rubio, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. At Meta, we are committed to free expression. Each day, more than 3 billion people around the world use our apps to make their voices heard. By the end of this year, more than 2 billion people will have voted in elections around the world, and we are proud that our apps help people participate in the civic process. No tech company does or invests more to protect elections online than Meta, not just during peak election seasons, but at all times. We have around 40,000 people overall working on safety and security, and we've invested more than $20 billion on safety and security since 2016. Meta has developed a comprehensive approach to protect the integrity of elections based on several key principles. First, we have strong policies designed to prevent voter interference and intimidation. Second, we connect people to reliable voting information. Third, we work tirelessly to combat foreign interference and the spread of misinformation. And finally, we lead the industry in transparency for political advertisements. Our approach reflects the knowledge gained from prior elections, and we continue to adapt to stay ahead of emerging challenges. One of the most pressing challenges for the industry is people seeking to interfere with elections to undermine the democratic process. We constantly work to find and stop these campaigns across our platforms. This is an adversarial space, and we are often responding to urgent situations with imperfect information. We may not always get it right. So we need to be cautious, and in each case, we need to conduct our own independent investigation to identify what is and is not interference. Where we identify coordinated inauthentic behavior, we remove the networks at issue. In fact, we have removed over 200 such networks since 2017, including networks from Russia, Iran, and China. We remain committed to stopping these threats, and we are constantly improving and evolving our defenses to stay ahead of our adversaries. I'm pleased to appear beside other industry leaders today, and it underscores an important point. People trying to interfere in elections rarely target a single platform. Cross-industry collaboration, transparency, and reporting are essential to tackle these networks across the internet. And that is why we publicize our takedowns for all to see and share the relevant information we learn with researchers, academics, and others, including, of course, Congress. This year, elections are also taking place as more people are using AI tools. To date, we have not seen generative AI-enabled tactics used to subvert elections in ways that have impeded, so far, our ability to disrupt them. However, we remain vigilant and will continue to adapt as the technology does as well. We know that AI progress and responsibility can and must go hand in hand. That is why we are working internally and externally to address the risks of AI. We've implemented industry-leading efforts to label AI-generated content, giving people greater context for what they are seeing. And of course, we are working across industry to develop common AI standards. And we are proud to have signed onto the White House's voluntary AI commitments and the Tech Accord to combat deceptive use of AI in 2024 elections, both of which will help guide the industry towards safer, more secure, and more transparent development of AI. Every election brings its own challenges and complexities. We are confident our comprehensive approach can help protect the integrity of not only this year's elections in the United States, but elections everywhere. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for I want to put up the first two presentations. Let me add to what Mr. Smith said. I concur that the 48 hours before the election, but I would argue the 48 hours after the polls close, particularly if we have as close an election as we anticipate, could be equally, if not more significant in terms of spreading false information, disinformation, and literally undermining the tenets of our democracy. Now, there was a lot of press attention recently on the Department of Justice indictment of the Canadians in Tennessee who were paying off influencers, knowingly or unknowingly. What didn't get much attention is the first slide here, where under the banner of Fox News and the Washington Post, these look exactly like Washington Post and Fox News. Matter of fact, it may not be what we thought of as AI, but these are kind of AI techniques to make this so real. Matter of fact, they've even got real authors' bylines. And the balance of the ads and other things are totally reflective. This came out of this DOJ indictment. I guess the question in these are, Nick, you mentioned comprehensive. They appeared on your site. They also appeared on Twitter's site, X's site. I think it is a real shame that
But it's true.
in the previous
He did
investigations,
deliberately
Twitter
create
was
the
a very
migration trace.
collaborative entity.
It's true.
Under X, they are absent and some of the most egregious activities taking place. But I'm not sure any American, even a technology savvy American, is going to figure out that these are fake. So where does that responsibility lie? Shouldn't
They're
your
not fake, though.
efforts
They're real.
have been able to spot that? And how do we make sure, because only after the fact in 2016, we didn't have real-time numbers of how many Americans reviewing the fake sites, and they were ended up of, hundreds of millions. I still remember both the Tennessee Republican Party and the Black Lives Matter site. The real sites had less viewership than did the Russian-based sites. How does this get through? How do we know how extensive this is? And we have many, many more of these. What are we going to do about it in these next 48 hours to make sure that Americans are informed to beware? Mr. Clegg.
Well, firstly, Senator, you're absolutely right that it is a hallmark of Russian foreign interference in the democratic process to generate AI stories resembling real media. As it happens, since those appeared on our site, we have just over the last 48 hours banned the organization that spawned a lot of this activity, the disinformation, Rossiya Zavodnya, not least after the editor-in-chief gave an interview where she said publicly, and this is in effect a media organization owned and run out of the Kremlin, that she, and I quote, at least this is the translation, her and her team are conducting what she called guerrilla projects in the heart of American democracy. And the panel behind you is a manifestation of that. That is one of the reasons why.
I want to make sure I get to my second. I need to know how many Americans viewed this and other Russian-generated Facebook sites that appear to be media source. I hope to get that information as soon as possible. I also want to indicate there is still an effort, and this is more over here in terms of targeting by the Russians towards specific groups. In this case, it was the Doppelganger Gang, and it was both on Jewish Americans, and then one targeted towards Latino community. They're very sophisticated. I guess it wouldn't be jaw-dropping that they're focused most of their efforts on the same 6 states that that everybody else is focused on. But, and this again goes more to both Mr. Clegg and Mr. Walker, you know, they're still targeting paid advertising. You know, we remember in 2016 when we didn't even have controls when Russians were paying with rubles for paid advertising on sites. I would have thought 8 years later, we would be better at least screening the advertising. Again, in case of YouTube and in case of Facebook, what are we doing to stop the paid advertising targeting by these adversaries?
Since Nick took the last one, I can start on this one. We have an extensive series of checks and balances in our advertising networks that are designed to identify problematic accounts, particularly around election ads. We require election ads to have registration effectively. And in the 2016 situation, I remember we did an extensive forensic review of our systems and found that less than $4,000 had been spent on our networks.
Respectfully, you know, as recently as January, I wrote the Treasury Department that said, you know, both of your companies have still repeatedly allowed Russian influence actors, including sanctioned entities, to use your ad tools. We will get that specific information to you, and we're going to really need as soon as possible. The content, the bad actors, how much content have they purchased on both of your sites, and frankly others, and we're going to need that extraordinarily fast because I think they are getting through in many, many more ways than has been represented.
Certainly, I certainly appreciate the concern, and we have taken down, as we've indicated earlier, something like 11,000 different efforts by Russian associated entities to post content on YouTube and the like.
We're just going to need this as quickly as possible, both in terms of number of Americans viewing Fox News, what they think is Fox News or Washington Post, or advertisements. We need that data to make sure, again, that we inform the public.
Thank you. The area I want to focus on is where political speech is involved, and it's sort of this area I talked about in my opening statement, which is and really in particular, I want to understand what the current policies and practices are as we speak regarding content moderation, specifically in speech. So just for, as I'm reading, and I'm not reading the opening statement from Meta, we're constantly working to stop the spread of misinformation and disinformation. We have built the largest independent fact-checking network of any platform, nearly 100 partners from around the world, to review and rate viral misinformation in more than 60 languages. Stories that this platform, or these group of people rate as false, are shown lower in feed. And if some page repeatedly creates or shares misinformation, we significantly reduce their distribution and remove their advertising rights. Let me explain. We're not talking about the stuff that was up here. That's fake content. That's just purely fake content. It's generated to look like Fox News or Wall Street Journal, New York Times. That's not, no one's arguing that. That's fake. That should be taken down. Those companies should want it taken down. That's their copyright and their logo and their letterhead. I'm talking about this. So you've got a group of people that I think are your fact checkers from all over the world to determine where something is true or not. So let me take you back to a real world scenario, which ties into what the CEO of the company said, and that is there were people at one point saying, maybe I believe that the pandemic began in a lab. I believe there was an accident in the lab and it leaked out. And at one time, that was considered not factual. And in fact, there was pressure from government officials on companies not to report on that. How would that work today? A story like that, who determines whether that's true or not? Because it wasn't true then, but all of a sudden now it is 50% maybe likely. How would something like that, because there are people that were caught up in that. I imagine that under the policies that you describe, if I was out there or someone was out there raising the specter of a potential lab leak, it would run through these fact checkers from 100 partners all over the world. They would decide whether it's true or not. And you could have your page diminished, potentially deplatformed if I write too much about it. So how does this policy deal with that problem that I just described, which is a real world one?
Senator, yes, indeed it is. And as I said in my opening statement, we are obviously, we all inhabit a world of imperfect information, and crucially, and I think the pandemic was a very good example of that, information which changes. And obviously with the benefit of hindsight, we now understand the epidemiology of the pandemic, which we didn't at the time. When we were in the middle of the pandemic, prior to the vaccines being rolled out, when people were dying, when really no one knew what the trajectory was of this global pandemic, we as a engineering tech firm, of course, we're not specialists in.
Yeah, but I'm not asking what happened. I understand what happened. I want to know how this policy today would prevent that from happening. Because if the government is telling you this is a lie, we have proof that it's a lie, take it down, and your fact checkers say it's a lie, then my account gets blocked, gets diminished today, if that happened today.
Right.
now.
So two things. Firstly, we do continue to rely on these independent fact checkers. We don't employ them. They're not part of Meta. They're independently vetted by a third party organization.
Who are they?
Oh, there's a variety of organisations which specialise in examining what they think is a reliable way of asserting whether something is.
Is there a way to know who those vetters are?
Oh, yeah,
Is there a list
absolutely.
somewhere? Is like a roster?
We have a full list, absolutely. We can provide them to you, and they obviously work in multiple languages, including the United States. I think there are 11 fact checkers in the United States, and we can provide you with all the information on them. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, and Mark Zuckerberg did indeed explain this in his recent letter to the House Judiciary Committee, I think we learned our lesson, certainly as Meta is concerned, that in the heat of the moment, when governments, and it's governments around the world, exert particular pressure on us, on particular classes of content which they are particularly focused on, we need to act always, and we strive to do this, but of course we make mistakes. We need to act independently, and we need to be resistant to the sort of passing moods and passions around particular bits of content, which was particularly the case during the pandemic. People were in effect in a panic.
Let me, in a different context, the exact same system, a laptop appears, and 51 people sign a letter saying, we used to work in the intelligence community, this is Russian disinformation, and your fact checkers say, we got to listen to the experts, they would know. Does the New York Post get their account taken down again?
So to be very clear, we did not take down the account or the content. I think X, who are not here, but they did. We did
Right, but
not.
under this policy, if you deem it to not be true because it's disinformation, because some guys signed a letter saying that it would lower them in the feed and potentially reduce their distribution. And if they post that story too many times, you may actually lock them out.
So in
With
this
this policy.
Sorry, in this instance, Senator, you're correct that story was demoted in it. I mean, it was always available. Millions of people saw it, but its prominence on our services was temporarily reduced. And we used to do that to allow the fact checkers to give them the space and the time to choose to then examine that content. In this instance, the Hunter Biden story, they didn't do so. So that temporary demotion of a few days was then released, and it circulated.
Did the fact checkers reduce or demote the 51 people who signed the letter or the letter they signed? Because that turned out to be not true.
I don't believe they did so at the time, no.
All right, thank you.
Senator Heinrich.
So I want to stay on this same topic of the sort of fraudulent news sites that look like something people would recognize from their own news preferences. Do each of your companies have a policy of removal once you become aware of something that is clearly a fraudulent version of a legitimate site?
I think the answer is yes, and Vice Chairman Rubio, I thought, captured it very well. It actually, in my view, does not depend on whether the topic had anything to do with politics. Those are counterfeit sites. Those are people using the trademarks of Fox News and the Washington Post without their permission and in a way that deceives the public and diminishes the value of those companies. And so, yes, and I think you'd see pretty universally across the industry terms of use that prohibit that.
Why does it seem to take as long as it does for those sites to be identified and removed? I know they remain up sometimes longer than I think most of us would hope or expect. And then have you been able to use AI proactively to identify some of those fake news outlets?
Oh, yeah, that's all
I think increasingly
This
we
is
are using
terrible.
AI to detect these kinds of
AI
problems.
is
And I think
BS.
AI is especially good at detecting the use of AI to create content. That's one of the things we do. And we are able to see things faster. You always have to be in a race. But for example, just this morning, we saw a Russian group put online an AI-enhanced video putting into Vice President Harris's words at a rally, words she never spoke. And so I think that is one of the goals for all of us to keep pursuing, to identify these things faster and then where appropriate, take action.
I'm encouraged because obviously AI is being used offensively and we need to be on our game and responding with those same tools to be able to identify and appropriately deal with these things at a much faster rate. At a hearing of the U.S. House Committee on House Administration last week, New Mexico's Secretary of State testified that, quote, years of false election claims and ideological attempts to discredit our voting systems and processes have led to increased threats and harassment to election workers, end quote. How have you sought to improve your platform's ability to detect and remove content that actually threatens or harasses people who are part of the democratic process and apparatus for fairly administrating elections?
I'm happy to take that. And I suspect the same is true for all of us. There are two elements of that. One is making sure that we are trying to safeguard our elections officials against threats that may be posted online. And I'm confident that all of our companies have policies against incitements to violence, direct threats, bullying, cyber attacks, et cetera. So that kind of
I
material
don't
would
know
come
about
out.
this hearing.
The second half is helping our election officials be more protected themselves through the use of some of the tools that we have spoken about, like the Advanced Protection Program, so their information is not being hacked or doxed, et cetera. Personal information is not being made public and the like. So between the various companies here, including, I know our Mandiant Group has worked with a number of election officials and agencies to make them more cyber resilient, if you will, so more robust against cyber attack.
Mr. Clegg.
And Senator, again, I'm sure this is in common for all of those represented here, but we also encourage local election officials to use our platforms to communicate with voters. So we established a system called Voting Alerts. And I think since we established that program in 2020, around 650 million voting alerts have been issued by local and state officials on Facebook's apps and services, so that voters are properly informed about where and when to vote.
I'm going to give the rest of my time back. Very uncharacteristic for this
Very
body,
rare,
but
exactly.
nonetheless.
I'll take it.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Clegg, we've received briefings from the intelligence community that indicate that China is not focused on the presidential election race, but rather on down ballot races at the state level, county level, local level. And that concerns me because officials at those levels are far less likely to receive the kinds of briefings that we receive, or to get information from Homeland Security or the FBI on how to be on alert. In addition, China is attempting to build relationships with state and local officials. We see the Sister City programs. We see the Confucius Institutes and educational institutions. So how are your platforms attempting to help safeguard the down ballot races? The presidential race, I think everybody's aware of the risk there, but the down ballot is what really concerns me.
And Senator, I think you're right to be concerned, and that's why our vigilance needs to be constant. It can't just sort of peak at the time of the presidential elections. It's something which we need to deploy our policies and our enforcement around the world and around the clock. And you're also right, Senator, to point out that what we have at least seen, I mean, just my colleagues have witnessed, but what we have at least seen is that from what we call coordinated inauthentic behavior networks conducted by China, some of them are quite specifically targeted at particular communities. So, for instance, quite recently, we disabled dozens of Facebook and Instagram accounts which were targeting the Sikh community in the United States. And that is one of the reasons why the central signals that we look for aren't related to the content or even the person, but the behavioral patterns that we see. And the telltale patterns are most especially the use of a network of fake accounts. And that, of course, then manifests itself in lots of different ways, is targeted at different communities. But the underlying analysis that our teams conduct is about the behavior rather than the individual bit of content. Because as Vice Chairman Rubio said, sometimes the content can be actually consistent with things that are circulated by kind of ordinary folk in kind of the normal day-to-day business.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, you talked about the need for the American people to be prepared and to be on the alert. Why isn't part of the answer so that we're not getting into suppressing dissenting views or criticism of public officials, for example? Why isn't the answer to watermark posts to indicate not whether they're AI generated, but rather where they originate? Like, why couldn't you do an R if it came from Russia? Then the person who's looking at the post can make his or her own determination, but they would be on alert that this isn't Joe down the street who's posted this. This is someone who's in Russia.
I do think that's a really interesting idea, and it's one that across the industry, people have been giving a lot of thought to. I would say a couple things. First, I think actually it starts with also picking up on the idea you just described and putting Americans and American organizations in a position to put what's called metadata in effect, to put the credentials in place so it's clear where their content has come from. We worked, for example, with the Republican National Convention, and they used that on more than 4,000 images that were released in Milwaukee so that it would protect their content from being distorted. I do think one can then go farther, and it's an important question, as you raised. If we find something that is coming from somewhere else, how and when should we identify it? I frankly think the most important thing is that we address content where that kind of protection has been removed. And that's been the subject of legislation being proposed, including from members of this committee, to protect against tampering. And then we can think about other forms of identification for the public.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, all of you, for being here for this very important hearing. I just got back from visiting our allies in the Baltics, who are all border Russia, also to Finland. And they have been targeted by disinformation attacks at a pretty high level and come pretty quickly. And they have efforts in place to try to equip their citizens and their institutions to counter disinformation campaigns. They feel somewhat successfully, though it is a big problem for them. But I do think we can learn something, from our partners in the Baltics. Malicious actors, as you know, use social media and internet platforms as a key vector for these campaigns that they have against us, and are increasingly employing tools. We've talked about this, bots, generative AI. So it's my hope that we can also count on the partnership of the American tech industry to aggressively counter these threats. I want to turn to a specific problem that's of great concern to me, and as my constituents learn about this, I'm sure it will be to them as well. Behind me, you can see a screen capture of Russian-made web pages designed to look like major American outlets, Fox News and the Washington Post, but showing fabricated headlines. I went through these the other day. I think the chairman showed, something very similar. So apologies if we're being a little bit redundant here. But these pages were created by Russian cyber operatives to distribute Russian messages by co-opting the brand of a real news website that Americans trust, both Fox News and the Washington Post, but there are others as well. And these are really well done. I mean, it would be hard, unless you were looking specifically at the URL and noticed that something was not exactly right, where there was no .com, there was .pm or something else at the end. You wouldn't otherwise know, and you would think this is a legitimate news source. they've also spoofed the official NATO website as well. And they use these sites to push messages that cast doubt on Russian atrocities that we know are real. They lie about NATO suppressing peaceful protests. They stoke controversies or even invent them where they don't exist. An additional concern is they have specifically targeted swing state voters, so my constituents in Arizona and others, and they seek to influence the outcome of these elections. And this is absolutely beyond the pale. We've got to do something about it. So I'm curious from each of you, and I have about 2 minutes here, just what are you doing about it? And specifically with these websites, if we were to go and look for them now, have they been taken down? As the Fox News website, the Washington Post, would we still, is there a way to, let's say we start with you, Mr. Walker, if we search on Google and try to find this through a Google search engine or search for the Washington Post, could we navigate from your website to these fake websites?
So we're obviously concerned about the larger problem. I haven't searched for these specific sites, but I can tell you we've launched tools called About This Image and About This Result, which tells you the first time we saw an image appear on the internet. So in many cases, disinformation may not be AI generated. It may be a repurposed photo. Most of the disinformation we see coming out of Gaza is not AI generated. It's pictures from a different war. So providing that kind of context is valuable. And then just quickly to say that if content is AI generated, increasingly the ability to watermark it or understand its provenance through the C2PA cross-industry group that I mentioned before will help all of us do a better job of identifying and removing this kind of content.
But once you find the content and you know it is fake, at that point, can you take action to make sure that your customers cannot navigate to that conflict or to that content?
The search context is somewhat different than other contexts where we're hosting information. So let's say YouTube, which would be our hosted content example here. If something is demonstrably false and harmful, we will remove it, in addition to all of our other policies. And that's been consistent for many years. We also have a general manipulated media policy, whether it's AI manipulation or you may remember the cheap fakes that went around some time ago, which were just slowing down videos to make a politician look as though they were intoxicated. We will remove that kind of
they
content,
were
yes.
real.
You said if it's
dude.
false or
Biden
harmful,
really
how about if
did-
it's
was
just them
demented.
co-opting somebody else's
Cheap fakes,
website
my
like Fox
ass.
News or
I've had
Washington
enough of
Post?
this
I
crap.
go back to
I'm done with it.
Brad's
See you
earlier
guys
comments
later.
with
Ciao
regard
for
to the
now.
notion of trademark